The essence of critical thinking is about finding answers to our questions and problem solving with a constant check for whether we're putting bias or our opinion into it.
The ability to look outside of yourself, to remember that your experience, your bias, like Cam said, is tainted by your position. We're very practiced at absorbing these questions and realizing that these questions exist, but maybe are less practiced at asking those questions ourselves.
Social media adds rocket fuel to that bias level by not only we have our own experiences, but now we can see the experiences of so many millions of people.
Life comes at you quick. How do you prepare yourself for a career that you can't even imagine yet? That's what Cam and I will delve into each episode on future-proofing your career. Cam, a retired professor, memoirist, and CPA, shares insights from his dynamic professional life, while I, a recent graduate and a young professional, voice the concerns of the next professional generation as we try to navigate a rapidly changing market. Learn how to arm yourself with an open and informed mentality that will take your career to the next level.
Welcome back, everyone. It's me, Lexi, and Cam. We have another episode for you today. And today we're going to be talking about critical thinking. Now, Cam's brought up an interesting point. I'd love to know everyone else's thoughts on this as well, because it's not my gut reaction with this term. Cam says he feels there's kind of the consensus that this term might feel a little bit negative. But I think coming from an English background with lots of interpretation and critical thinking, I've never seen this term as a negative one. Cam, would love to hear how you have noticed it being used negatively or taken negatively.
I guess I'll start by just saying critical thinking is so important, as you're saying. It's too bad critical thinking doesn't have a better name, something like dynamic problem solving or something about solutions, because that's really what critical thinking is driving at. It's trying to solve problems. And when I say problems, I mean business problems. So they're not always bad problems. Opportunities can be business problems. So the essence of critical thinking is about finding answers to our questions and problem solving with a constant check for whether we're putting bias or our opinion into it, because that's flavoring it in a certain direction, which might actually taint what the overall perceptions are. So we want to weed out the bias and personal opinions that we're including. That's the essence of critical thinking, is just doing what we do, answering questions and solving our everyday problems, but trying to lose that bias. There's a software called SAP, a very big company, and I won't give you all the details. A lot of people have heard of SAP. If you haven't, it was the real rage in the 90s and early 2000s, and it's still around today. And I had a particularly good experience with the implementation of this SAP when I was at Bell Mobility. They invested properly, they implemented it properly, they did all the right things. And so as an aside to that, I lecture and teach a lot in corporate strategy, and a big part of corporate strategy is implementation. So I've asked hundreds of people over the years, who has experience with SAP? And a bunch of hands go up. And I say, who had a really good experience with it? And a few of those hands stay up. Who had a really bad experience? And about the same number of hands go up, good experience to bad experience. And my point with that is SAP is the same tool. It was implemented differently, and that's my point to them. It's implemented differently, and that's why you feel differently about it. You didn't get any training. That's why you hate it. You were on your own. Whereas I got lots of training, so I wound up really liking it. Say I'm at a new company now, and I'm on a committee, and they're thinking about putting SAP forward. What's my bias going to be? And let's say someone who had a really bad experience at another company is on the committee. What's their bias going to be? So critical thinking is trying to weed out your personal experience with something so that you can get to more objective results that suit the actual problem you're trying to solve.
This is great because I wanted to also bring up something that might be different between our generations, your social media consumption and our social media consumption. With my generation, we have this very narrow and individualistic perspective. we love individualism and we love our opinion. And if our experience is one that's, tainted strongly by something, we tend to consider that as like the default experience that everyone's had. That's a lot of the way that social media content is now framed. And so what gets really interesting with critical thinking is the people that have this ability to remember how many millions or billions of different perspectives there are in the world. Those are the ones who are able to really effectively weed through all of these external influences that we are literally bombarded with. And so the ability to look outside of yourself, to remember that your experience, your bias, like Cam said, is tainted by your position within the world is one of the most important skills you can have. And to shift it over to the workplace again, when you're interacting with coworkers or subject matter experts or your bosses, they all have different positions. And so they all have different perspectives coming at the same issue. And so when you can feel really frustrated, like you're not getting the results you want for a project or people aren't answering quick enough, I fear that people my age with this individualistic outlook on life are going to be really quick to blame other people for not serving their needs. That could have negative repercussions in the workplace. But I'll also say it looks like it's a little bit divided, because I know a lot of people who are my age, and I've seen a lot of content from people who are my age say the other generations they interact with feel a lot more entitled, and that maybe we are so aware of how many perspectives are out there that we feel very uncomfortable asking for things that we need in the workplace. And so it's a really weird tightrope to kind of walk. Cam, I don't know what your experience was like in the workplace. Did you find people were nervous or hesitant to ask for help or, ask someone to do their like basic job responsibilities?
To be honest, it really depended on how good their boss was. Because if they had a good boss who was open and would answer questions and give them the time and the patience, even the most timid people would tend to come around. But if you had one of those bosses, like, you should know that already, I don't have time for this. A lot of times it's the boss that kind of drives that behavior. That's been my personal experience to answer that question. And just really quickly to come back to social media, my mind opened up when you started mentioning it, because critical thinking, as I'd mentioned, is about trying to strip away that bias that we have from our own personal experience. Social media adds rocket fuel to that bias level by not only we have our own experiences, but now we can see the experiences of so many millions of people, and then start to form our opinions based on that. So that's a real check to make sure that as we're weeding out bias, to think about where our biases come from. Is it personal experience, or is it what we've consumed on social media, or some of each? It's a good point. I want to share an example of a critical thinking framework that is used a lot in business, and that is the cost benefit analysis. And most of us have heard of a cost benefit analysis, assessing all of the costs, both financial and non-financial, of a certain initiative, then assessing all of the benefits, both financial and non-financial, and doing an assessment. And so that's considered a critical thinking tool. But of course, there's bias mixed into our projections, because as soon as you're predicting the future, there's bias. So it's a great example, the cost benefit, of a framework that's a critical thinking framework, but we need to be on guard to try to strip out as much bias as we can. And more opinions and diversity is one good way to do that. So let's say there's a small committee on this cost benefit analysis project. It's more likely to strip out that bias. So just a bit of detail on the cost benefit analysis is, I mentioned the costs are both financial and non-financial. Financial tend to be as fairly objective as you can be. At least you've got some real numbers to try to anchor to. The non-financial numbers, those are the tricky ones. So let's say you fear with a new initiative, it could tarnish your reputation a little bit. That would be one of the non-financial costs, is that risk of reputation damage. And you can't, how do you assess that financially, right? How do you put that in a cost benefit? That's where you need to try to be as objective as possible. And same idea with the benefits. The benefits, we can try to project the financials as best we can, but then there's also that non-financial side to the benefits. So on the reverse, let's say one of the benefits was that it's going to improve our reputation. We get the green environmental check mark if we do it. How do you include that in a cost benefit analysis so you can look at it compared to the costs in that type of more objective apples to apples approach? It's tricky to do, but with some really good expertise and a good enough team, good enough diverse team, you can put together an executive cost benefit analysis. So a really good objectively done cost benefit analysis is written up like an executive summary with the details as backup, and then you just present the costs and the benefits. And that's how you try to implement critical thinking frameworks in the workplace.
You might also be able to take that same framework and apply it to your own personal life. So, for example, right now, I am working a contract position that I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for my boss to give the go ahead that it's going to turn into permanent employment so that I can stop wondering if I'll have a job in a few months. Right as I got pretty solid confirmation that this job is going to turn into full-time employment, I also got a call from Google telling me that they would like to set up an interview for me to work over there, but it'd be another contract position. And then at the same time, I had a meeting with another team within the company that I'm at now. It's a little bit more up my alley for interest, but it's a new team. And they were saying how they have some headcount that would probably be opening up next quarter, and they would love to get in touch with me then when that position opens up. So they all kind of line up around the same time. And so if we're drawing on what Cam's talking about, it would be really easy for me to like line up all those salaries for those three positions and say, okay, which one has the highest salary? But then there's those like sneaky, less objective bits that I do have to think really critically about. One, that my team that I'm on currently has fought so hard to get me a position, that I love being on that team, that I'd be very supported on that team and have a great working environment. But with the new company, it'd be an opportunity to broaden horizons and learn things, but it might be a bridge burned with my current team, right? So there's these maybe more personal places too within the workplace where you can take that same model and apply it to your thinking. And maybe it's just a simple pros cons list, a T chart where you put the good on one side and the bad on the other, or one option on one side and one option on the other, and just weigh it out. But that type of critical thinking, instead of just going with a gut response, can be really helpful for big picture planning.
The precursor to the cost benefit analysis that I mentioned is the pros and cons, because when you do a cost benefit analysis, that means you're really settling on looking at one alternative now. You've decided where you're going to invest your time doing the research, the full research. But before that, where you are is when you have multiple alternatives, right? So let's say you have 3 career alternatives and you set up a chart and you put for each one the pros and the cons. So for you, one of the pros on one of the lists would be, this is the highest salary of the 3, right? And then on another list in the cons, it would be, this is the lowest salary. So I can see you using the pros and cons to try to get to that decision. And then once you think you're at a decision point, then a cost benefit analysis. In your case, maybe it wouldn't make sense, but in a bigger corporate sense, after you've been through your alternatives list and made a selection, then you move to cost benefit. So that's great that I see you keying in on the not only critical thinking, but the order of the framework.
This indirectly came up last week while we were prepping for our previous episode. We were talking about different people considering different things to be research. So Cam, tell us a little bit on your views on modern day quote research.
Right, you're right, which has changed over the years, certainly with social media. Here's just a simple model that I'm going to see if it resonates. Group one, in terms of research buckets, group one is just leisure and curiosity stuff. So the stakes are very low, and we're not talking about important decisions. Like, I'll give you an example. You're watching a movie and you see an actor, and it's like, did I see them in this other movie? And you Wikipedia them to confirm it was them in the other movie, or it wasn't, right? And then you might read their background and biography, and they were born in Wisconsin or whatever. If that stuff's not true, my life doesn't change, right? So that's when I'll use Wikipedia. It's just interest kind of stuff, the low stakes stuff, leisure and curiosity. I'm going to switch now to the high stakes stuff. We're talking about mental health, really important things. That's where I'm really wary of any news source, to be honest with you, because there's just so many diverse opinions on what's going on. And, facts are facts, but once they're filtered through to us, are they still facts? I don't know how often that's true. So the high stakes stuff, like the really important stuff, that's where Wikipedia and things like that, I definitely park. But there's a gray area in between those two, right? The leisure and curiosity, and then the really high stakes important stuff. There's a gray area in between. And to me, Wikipedia is a good example to use. Stuff like that if the stuff in Wikipedia is wrong because it's not peer reviewed, it's not going to change any of my real decision making. But if it's important stuff like mental health, I sometimes will go to Wikipedia and scroll to the bottom. And that's what I always told my students. Research is not Wikipedia. Research is scrolling to the bottom of Wikipedia and finding the research in peer-reviewed periodicals and articles and published case studies.
I find the issue with people my age is that deep down we do know that there are accurate sources of information and inaccurate. Our awareness of what is true and what is fabricated or a little bit inaccurate or becoming like versions of old wives' tales, but online, or conspiracy theory, whatever, our awareness of that is really diminished. And it seems to be a symptom of our chronic online presence. What I do think, though, becomes really interesting is when you realize that social media is bringing about a million different micro platforms for people within each platform itself. So like TikTok has a million, probably a billion users, and they all have micro platforms. And then Instagram's same, Facebook is the same. And so people are hyper aware of all these positions and all these different ways that one single story could be told so many different ways. But I think maybe as a coping mechanism, maybe out of pure exhaustion, we're not filtering it in our brains the same way. But at the same time, we also have access to people who are asking more and more questions about what we're seeing and about what we're consuming than anyone before. So, for example, you're consuming content on, I'll take it back to career. Let's say you're consuming content on what makes a good resume. Okay. If you're searching for a job, your TikTok feed could be all resume content. And you're getting all these people who are claiming to be professional resume people, or maybe they're in HR, maybe they're recruiters, they've seen a lot. All of a sudden, they're asking all these questions that you would have never consumed before. And so it seems that we're very practiced as a generation. We're very practiced at absorbing these questions and realizing that these questions exist, but maybe are less practiced at asking those questions ourselves, because you just simply can't for every single topic that you come across every day. What Cam and I are trying to encourage with this episode is that you really pick your battles. And for Cam, he's saying like, use reliable sources for things that really matter and have impact, and maybe filter less, save your brain space for those sorts of things and not the inconsequential topics. I might take it a step further and say, use your critical thinking, use your question asking abilities for things that are going to have impact on your life. So take it to career. If you're researching what your salary should be based on your field, that is where critical thinking needs to come in. Even peer reviewed things when it comes to career, when it comes to experiences in the workplace, are going to have ingrained biases based on gender, based on socioeconomic status, because where money's allotted for research, where interest lies, and also who's included as subjects in that research is all reflective of the biases in the different societies that are conducting that research. And so as an individual, it is so, so important to be able to ask those questions, remember those biases, and try and filter out that information the best you can, or make sure that you're asking the right questions. That was kind of a dump about everything going on in the brain of a Gen Z online.
Thank you for opening my eyes, because, I knew we were doing this episode that included bias, but I didn't realize, and I should have maybe, that social media has made your generation's biases so much different and so much more baked in a certain way than ours. So thank you for opening my eyes to that. It's something we'll probably come back to on another episode as I digest that. It's very interesting.
There's a lot going on in a lot of our brains while we're consuming. And for some people, it's a whole lot of nothing actually as a whole coping mechanism. I know during the pandemic, I was trying to be very aware of everything that was going on and trying to keep up with all the politics and all this stuff. And it's crazy how tiring that can become when it's all you're bombarded with and all of your critical thinking goes towards that. But I think we can also, my generation can remind ourselves that we can use those critical thinking abilities for ourselves sometimes too. And it doesn't always need to be for these ginormous, maybe more abstract political things that I know a lot of us feel really compelled to react to or think about. It's okay to use your critical thinking for yourself, for figuring out, what salary is going to allow you to live the life that you want to live, or what are you owed by a company based on your position, based on your skill set and your education. Like, these are areas where, critical thinking really comes into play and will really have like direct impact on you. And so try not to fatigue yourself before you get there and have to make those decisions.
This is all just a gentle reminder, a gentle nudge that we need to be as objective and unbiased as possible with the thoughts and decisions that really matter in life. So if you want to form opinions on a musician or, stuff like that, that's different. But the stuff that's really important to future-proofing yourself and having a good life, those are the ones that we're best served to try to weed out the bias when we're making our decisions.
This is the part of the episode, if you've been listening to a few already, Cam and I like to prepare lightning round questions for each other. These are questions that we have no preparation for. We simply answer with a gut reaction. So Cam is going to start us off today. Cam, what is your lightning round?
Well, I'm going to give you a scenario. So you, Lexi, at work, you're heading a committee to evaluate the feasibility of having a Friday afternoon mini golf tournament, boost morale and all that stuff. And you've been to the golf place before, and it's very suitable to what you're trying to achieve. And during the meeting, someone shouts out, if we're going to do this golf thing, we shouldn't go to that golf place. It's a dump. And then they look at you for a response. What do you say?
In my approaches to these types of conflicts, I prioritize perspective the most. So my first response would be, okay, thank you for telling me. Please let me know why you think that. And then go from there. I would probably list the reasons why I think it's a good option. They might list the reasons that it's not. And then a back and forth about that would probably ensue. I like mediating and I'm okay with conflict like that. But I do prioritize making everyone in discussions feel heard, validated, and that like the decision that's made at the end, everyone is as happy with as possible. Obviously, try not to people please, but more make sure that the best option is the most suitable to everyone.
Yeah, that last part was key. There is to drive toward, try for consensus, but at least, if not consensus, at least majority, right? Because again, this is a low stakes. It's a golf tournament for fun, right? It's not software or people's layoffs or something. So that's one thought there, that you're right on the right track with the consensus. Something I learned from experience, something I used to do is I would have gone head to head with that person. So they think it's a dump, and I would say, I was just there. I think it's very suitable. And that pits me against them, my bias against their bias. Because something I snuck in there, Lexi, on you, is that you being there and the place is very suitable. Well, how do we know what your suitable is, right? So I kind of planted you into a tough spot there. So I think you were really on the right track by saying, well, we want this to be the best for the majority of us. So by show of hands, who's okay with this golf course and who's had a bad experience? Something to draw the group into it as opposed to pitting one-on-one. And that, again, I'm telling you that from learning from my mistakes. And again, coming back to trying to be as objective as possible and relying on a group to try to achieve that.
For mine, I have just a simple question. When you interact with content online, what types of questions do you ask yourself while consuming that content?
Am I dealing with something important to me? So I'll give you an example. If I looked up, I'll just give you an easy example, is bipolar. Okay, I might start with Wikipedia's kind of executive summary definition. But then again, that's where I would scroll to the bottom if I'm doing real research to try to find the peer review. Because Wikipedia is really good for that. There's often a really good bank, like full credit to the people who put stuff on Wikipedia. It's just that, some of it's biased. But I really like to tap into that research. And then, so to answer your question, the importance level of what I'm looking at, talking about bipolar versus a hockey player and where he played junior, that kind of stuff. Not important. I can look at that very loosely.
For me, for example, I'm always curious, like, okay, let's use TikTok again because it's just a common platform for my age group, but for you, it might be Facebook. And I see something like a post and I wonder, okay, who's posting this? What's their motivation? Where are they coming from? Are they selling me something? Do they have an agenda? Like those types of questions. And then also, who's their intended audience? And what are the people that are commenting saying? And how does this play into the other things that I've seen on the same topics? More about what's coming across maybe like a Twitter feed or Facebook feed, things like that you're just seeing. What's the motivation there, and kind of getting to the bottom of it. People have a tendency to see these posts or these articles or things in isolation, like that they're happening in a vacuum, when realistically, when they're being produced, they have this whole like iceberg below the water of what's happening and why they're being said that way. And we need to be a little bit more cognizant of that.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, so basically, what's motivating them to write what they're writing? So if they're saying a product is amazing, right? Are they doing an objective comparison of products? Or does it turn out, if you click the link, they make some money? Very good point about what is their motivation for writing what they're writing.
People my age are so used to being bombarded with people who are trying to sell us stuff. So we get pretty caught up in it. But it happens for politics too, like lots of interesting political stuff on there, or job information or economy information, things like that too. It's always taken with a grain of salt and some critical thinking.
And it's too bad for the stuff that's online that's actually really true and was well researched and well thought out and well presented, because we don't know what to trust a lot of the times, right? So it's unfortunate to the good researchers out there who are putting really good, truthful content.
Hopefully, platforms that have that kind of foundation of being as accurate as possible or objective stay true to that, because I think there are some really great news sites and some really great, well, obviously academic research. So hopefully those stay, I don't know, quote, pure as everything else gets more and more watered down, or more and more nuanced, maybe not watered down, nuanced.
And another thought there is to get a cross section of opinion. So like the stuff going on in the US, the trials and stuff. If you rely on one news channel, right, it's going to be directed a certain way. That's where YouTube is really useful, because you can get CNN 10-minute clip update. Then you can switch to something more conservative. You can try to get, if it's important to you, I mean, then you can get a better cross section.
I saw someone asking a bunch of people just a simple question: where do you get your news from? And it was within generations. Almost every single person within each generation had the exact same answer. It's very interesting.
And probably a bit scary, but that's a different topic.
Yeah, that's the end of our episode. We hope that actually you go forth and critically think a little bit more about the kind of information you're consuming, but also how you might use critical thinking in the workplace when navigating between positions, when interacting with different people in the workplace, and when trying to make decisions for yourself about how to future-proof your career.
Just a quick thanks to you, and a quick thanks to our awesome listeners for listening and staying with us this long, and to wish Lexi bon voyage on her trip to Italy tomorrow. So good luck with that. Can't wait to hear the details.
Thanks.